Thank you, and I rise in opposition to this amendment. I could spend my time talking about the cuts to the low-income heating and energy program, LIHEAP. And that's important because there are many people in my district suffering through the worst winter in Memphis's recent history, and one of the worst winters in the country's history, that need help with their utility bills more than ever. And that's, I think, an awful thing, that when people are suffering from the inability to pay their utility bills, that we're cutting LIHEAP. I could talk about what we're doing to law enforcement, cutting the COPS program that puts police on the street and helps the local government put new policemen on the street to protect our people, and cuts to state and law enforcement spending. I could talk about the many calls and letters I've gotten from people concerned about Title X cuts that will affect 5,500 people in my community, women that won't be able to get family planning services, which include cancer screenings, annual exams in my city. I could talk about cuts to NPR, cuts to the National Institute of Health, where they're looking for cures for cancer and Alzheimer's and diabetes and other illnesses that affect our populace, which we need to cure as soon as possible, or cuts to the FDA, $241 million to keep our food safe and preserve public health. Our cuts to Social Security and Medicaid. And a gentleman stopped me Saturday and said, please, you tell the people in Washington, don't mess with our Social Security and our Medicaid. But there are great cuts here, there as well. Or the $18 billion cuts to transportation. And Memphis is a transportation hub with rails and roadways and runways and river transportation. And that $18 billion cuts in transportation is going to hurt the growth of our economies and extending goods to market. I could talk about any of those items. I could talk about the cuts to legal services and the fact that more and more people need legal services in these economic times, and the housing crisis hasn't left us, and people need representation. I could talk about cuts to education and historically black colleges and universities and Head Start programs. How are we going to compete, which we're not doing well in science and math, with the Chinese and the Indians if we cut these programs? I could talk about any and all those programs. But one thing I want to do is I want to read a column called Eat the Future. And Paul Krugman, a Nobel Prize-winning economist, wrote this. So I just think it's worthy to listen and have it heard on this floor, what Mr. Krugman said yesterday, Nobel Prize-winning economist. On Friday, House Republicans unveiled their proposal for immediate cuts in federal spending. Uncharacteristically, they failed to accompany the release with a catchy slogan. So I'd like to propose one. Eat the future. I'll explain it in a minute. First, let's talk about the dilemma the GOP faces. Republican leaders like to claim that the midterm elections gave them a mandate for sharp cuts in government spending. Some of us believe that the elections were less about spending than they were about persistent high unemployment. But whatever. The key point to understand is that while many voters say that they want lower spending, press the issue a bit further, and it turns out what they really want to cut spending on other people. That's the lesson from a new survey by the Pew Research Center, in which Americans were asked whether they favored higher or lower spending in a variety of areas. It turns out that they wanted more, not less, spending on most things, including education and Medicare. They're evenly divided about spending on aid to the unemployed and, surprise, defense. The only thing they clearly want to cut is foreign aid, which most Americans believe wrongly accounts for a large share of the federal budget. Pew also asked people how they would like to see the states close their federal budget deficits. Do they favor cuts in either education or health care, the main expenses states face? No. Do they favor tax increases? No. The only deficit reduction measure with significant support was cuts in public employee pensions, even where the public was evenly divided there. The moral is clear. Republicans don't have a mandate to cut spending. They have a mandate to repeal the laws of arithmetic. How can voters be so ill-informed? In their defense, bear in mind that they have jobs, children to raise, parents to take care of. They don't have the time or the incentive to study the federal budget, let alone state budgets. So they rely on what they hear from seemingly authoritative figures. And what they've been hearing since Ronald Reagan is their hard-earned dollars are going to waste paying for vast armies of useless bureaucrats. Payroll is only 5% of federal spending, and others. The bottom line is they've been hearing lies about the federal budget. They've been hearing lies about the federal bureaucracy. PolitiFact said that the biggest lie in 2009 was death panels. In 2010, it was government takeover of health care. If the Republicans get PolitiFact's Lie of the Year this year, they'll get the Irving Thalberg Lifetime Achievement Award. I hope they don't get it. Thank you, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentleman from Tennessee yields back the balance of his time.